Hello, friends. This week's episode is a little bit different. I've got a few interviews that I am still working on edits for that I was hoping to have ready for today. I was hoping I'd have one of the two ready for today and have neither ready. And then even this morning I thought, I could have it done before the weekend's up, and I, at this point, don't think I can. These are interviews that they deserve the time that it'll take to do them right. So I'm not going to rush it on those. Instead, I'm going to share with you something that I've been sharing over on Patreon for a few weeks now. A little delving into the realm of audiobooks. This is I'm trying to think of the right word. I was going to say tome. That wasn't right. I was going to say novel. That's not right either. This is a specimen. We might say a specimen from 1901. So a very long time ago. You've probably seen it floating around if you've been in the piping world for a while. It's called The Highalnd Bagpipe. It's History, Literature, and Music by W.L. Manson. And it's an old volume. It's an old book. I mean, we're talking 1901. Easy to do the maths on that, right? We're pushing 125 years already. And so I'm going to play you the first chapter here. I've got the first 3 chapters up right now over on Patreon, and am working on the 4th chapter right now. I'll admit to you, I am pretty self-conscious about some of the pronunciation in this book. Some of the place and person names are things that are a bit beyond me. I've been doing my best to look them up and try to get them pronounced correctly. But honestly, part of it too is that there's a time difference in the way that these words are being pronounced today compared to when this book was being written. And in a lot of cases, there's also this accent thing where it's it's not just that it's a different language. Sometimes it's maybe Scots English, for example, and I'm just not comfortable faking a Scots accent because I'm not good at it, and, well, I don't know. So with that in mind, that there's some very gringo pronunciation going on in here. I hope it's enjoyable. I've sure enjoyed reading it. It's really fun. It's fun to read a book this old especially because this book is about previous times to when it was being published. So it's kind of interesting because it's talking about days gone by as of 1901. It's doubly interesting because it's reading about history as seen in a time which I now see as historical. It's like a double study in bygone ages, attitudes, cultures, etc. Super fun. At least I think so. I hope it's fun. So I'm going to play you the first chapter. I don't know, maybe call this maybe this is like a little tease to convince you that you should join the Patreon. I don't know. I don't like to be quite so commercial as that. And really, this is just exactly what I said it was. I don't have the standard episode that I was hoping to have ready in time. So I hope this is an enjoyable placeholder. But if you want to get access to the other chapters and get more of them as I get them together, hop on over to the Patreon. That's where it's good. Also, I've talked just a little bit with Jeremy over at the Way Too Twags Bagpipe and History podcast about what we might do with these recordings of this book. And I keep meaning to mention to him specifically and haven't yet. So I'm just going to do it right here in public. I think it would be super fun to get commentary from Jeremy on these chapters. And I don't know if we would collaborate and someday put it out as a complete audiobook that goes chapter and then commentary and then chapter and then commentary, or if it would be a podcast thing, maybe a chapter or two at a time or what. But I think that would be fun. If that sounds fun to you, let me know via the social medias or emails, or if you have other ideas for what fun stuff we might do. And I'm not going to say go and bug Jeremy and tell him that he should collab with me on this or anything like that. Don't go bug him. He's very busy working on awesome episodes already. As I'm reading these things, often I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if that's true, or I wonder where that idea was coming from, or I wonder if other people were thinking that at the time. And Jeremy's a historian, and what's more, a bagpipe historian. He's just the right kind of person to shed some light on that stuff. Anyway, I hope this is enjoyable, and as usual, thank you very much for listening. And feel free to contact us anytime. I've got all the links in the show notes. And this week I'll have a link also to where you can get a copy of this book. I'll probably it's all over the place. You can find it on Google Books, and I'm pretty sure there's a Kindle version as well. It's all over, but I'll find it on Project Gutenberg or something and put a link in there so you'd have options if you want to look at it. It is fun to look at. It's got some cool illustrations throughout and stuff too. But anyway, sorry, 5 whole minutes of rambling. I apologize. Here comes the reading of Chapter 1, well, the introductory material, and Chapter 1 of The Highalnd Bagpipe, Its History, Literature, and Music by W.L. Manson, 1901. The Highalnd Bagpipe, Its History, Literature, and Music, with some account of the traditions, superstitions, and anecdotes relating to the instrument and its tunes, by W.L. Manson. Opening quotation. The tune with the river in it, the fast river, and the courageous, that kens not stop nor tarry, that runs round rock and over fall with a good humour, yet no mood for anything but the way before it. Neil Munro. Published by Alexander Gardner, publisher to Her late Majesty Queen Victoria, Paisley and 26 Paternoster Square, London, 1901. Dedication to A. Dewar Willock, editor of the Glasgow Weekly Herald, who judiciously blue-penciled the first issue of these articles and encouraged the writer to give them to the public in this more permanent form. Preface. This book was not written on a preconceived plan, drawn up from the beginning of the work. It growed. It had its inception in a commission to write for the Weekly Herald 6 biographical articles on famous pipers. The necessary investigation produced a mass of material too interesting to be left unused, and the 6 articles of the original commission became 27, with very little of the biographical in them. These, after being finally recast, revised, and in several cases rewritten, are now in the form of a book flung at the unoffending public. If the volume interests anyone, well. If not, well, there is nothing more to be said on that point. It were vain to attempt to acknowledge indebtedness to books or to men. Every available book bearing on the subject, even in the most indirect way, has been consulted, in many cases read. A great deal of the material used is, of course, common to all Highland literature, and one book cannot be quoted more than another. With men, it is equally impracticable to give names. So many have helped, so many have written giving additional bits of information or suggesting improvements. So many have, in reply to requests, kindly supplied matter dealing with the phases of the subject on which they have intimate knowledge, that one could not do justice to all without naming all. Still, while this may not be done, I cannot possibly refrain from saying that without the assistance given by Mr. Henry White, Fian, in matters of Highland history and questions connected with the Gaelic language, the book could hardly have been published, while Mr. John Mackay, editor of the Celtic Monthly, in throwing open to me his valuable library of Celtic literature, did very much to lighten my labors. This, I think, is all I can safely say. If I said more, I would have to say so very much. W.L.M., Glasgow, April 27th, 1901. Chapter 1. Tuning Up. Opening quotation. I have power, high power for freedom, to wake the burning soul. I have sonnets that through the ancient hills, like a torrent's voice, might roll. I have pealing notes of victory, that might welcome kings from war. I have rich deep tones to send the wail, for a hero's death afar. Chapter heading. 100 Pipers. Scotland becoming cosmopolitan. The war spirit of the pipes. Regiments, not clans. Annual gatherings. Adaptability of pipes. Scotch folk from home. An aged enthusiast. Highlands, an extraordinary study. Succession of chiefs. Saxon introduced. Gaelic printed. Highlands in 1603. The MacNeils of Barra. Highland hospitality. We 100 pipers and ah, is a song that catches on with Highland people as well now as in the days when the piper was a power in the land. There is a never-ending charm about the pipes, and there is a never-ending swing about the song of the 100 Pipers that stirs the blood of the true-born Celt and makes him applaud vigorously in rhythm with the swing of the chorus. But it is because the song harks back to the time when one good piper was a man to be revered, and 100 in one place a gathering to be dreaded, if they were all there of one accord, that it continues to hold its own. It expresses something of the grandeur that was attached to the national music, when the clan piper was second only to the chief in importance, and the pibroch as much a part of the clan life as the fiery cross. So it is accepted as the one outstanding bit of song that helps to keep alive the traditional glory of the great Highland bagpipe. Not that there is any immediate danger of that glory fading. It is but changing in character.
Scotland has become cosmopolitan, and the fastnesses of the Highlands are no longer the retreats of wild cattering clans, whose peculiar habits and primitive ideas of social life helped to bind them together with ties of family strength, and at the same time to keep them unspotted from the lowland and outside world that knew not the Gaelic and the tartan and the pipes. The Peop Mór is not now an agency to be reckoned with by anyone who wishes to explore the hills and glens. Neither are there any little wars in Lorne or elsewhere in which it can have an opportunity of leading Mac against Mac or clan against clan. As a Highland war spirit, its glory has departed, and he would be a bold man who would say he was sorry for it. True, the Highland regiments who fight Britain's battles abroad still wear the tartan and march to the same old strains, but they are not now Highland clans. They are British battalions, whose empire, instead of being bounded by the horizon of a Scottish glen, is worldwide, and they march and wheel and charge the enemy, and storm the heights in strict accord with the orders of the general who has his orders from Westminster. The only gathering of the clans we have nowadays are the gatherings in the halls of our big cities, where 1,000 or 2 of people bearing a common name meet under the presidency of the next of kin of the chief of olden times, and drink, not Mountain Dew, but tea, and have Highland or Jacobite songs sung to them by people whose profession is singing, and applaud dancers and pipers who dance and pipe because it pays them to do so. This is very far removed from the time when the Peop Mór was in the zenith of its power, though when one gets enthused with the atmosphere of such a meeting, and forgets the slushy streets outside, and the telegraph and the railway, and other 19th century things that have made the Highlands impossible, the song of the 100 pipers is quite sufficient to make the blood course quicker, to translate one for a moment to other scenes and other times. But it is only for a moment. The prosaic present comes back with a reality that will not be denied, and one remembers with a sigh that the song is but a sentiment, and that never more will the gathering cries of the clans re-echo through the glens, the fiery cross pass from hand to hand, or the peal of the pibroch ring from clachan to clachan, in a wild cry to arms. As an inspiration to the clansman, the bagpipe is no more, but it remains an integral part of Scottish life and character. It is one of the peculiarities of the instrument that it adapts itself to circumstances. When that phase of life in which it was born and brought up, as it were, passed away, it quietly but firmly declined to be moved into the background. There is something of the stubbornness of the old reivers about it, and just as the Highlander in his times of greatest adversity stuck to his pipes, so the pipes seem determined to stick to the Highlanders in spite of the tendencies of latter-day civilization. The love of the Highlander for his pipes is too deep-rooted to vanish simply because circumstances change. When Rob Roy lay a-dying, and when an old enemy came to see him, he had himself decked out in his plaid and claymore, and when the interview was over, "Now," said he, "let the piper play Cha till Matulit," and he died before the dirge was finished. That spirit has lived through the many changes that have taken place since Rob Roy's day, and it lives in a modified form now. Nothing will make a Scottish audience, especially a Scottish audience far from home, cheer as the pipes will, and no sound is so welcome at an open-air gathering, or to the wandered Scotchman, as the wild notes of the national instrument. In the preface to one collection of Highland music, we are told of a well-known Edinburgh man, discreetly referred to as W. B. Esquire, who was, at the time, the most exquisite violinist in Scotland. Even at the venerable age of 83, whenever he heard the sound of the pipes, he hastened to the place, and after giving the itinerant player a handsome reward, he withdrew to a passage or common stair near by, and had what he called a wee bit dance to himself. This does not seem a very wonderful proceeding, though the story applies to about 40 years ago, for even now, many a Highlander, if he is in anything like a private place, will begin to hooch and dance if he should happen to hear the pipes. He would never think of dancing to any other music. Other music is foolishness unto him. Many things may and will change, but it is hardly possible to imagine circumstances which could dislodge pipe music from its honoured place as the national music of Scotland. The preservation of the Gaelic, the kilt, and the pipes is the most notable feature in Highland history. Without his tartan, his language, and his music, the Gael would be only a naked Pict, meagre and pale, the ghost of what he was. But he has kept these, his distinguishing characteristics, and the Scottish Highlands of today is one of the most extraordinary studies in Europe, retaining as it does a language the most ancient, and the customs and music which distinguished it in ages most remote, in spite of circumstances which might have proved too much for any social system whatever. The nature of the country did much to perpetuate these things. It was hilly, and, in the old days, inaccessible. The wants of the people were supplied among themselves. Their manners were simple and patriarchal, and they had little intercourse with strangers except through trading in cattle and an occasional foray into the Low Country. So, a spirit of independence and jealous pride of ancestry was cultivated. And in tradition, song, and music, the exploits of their forebears were celebrated. All this went to make Celtic Scotland a nation by itself, and its people a peculiar people. There is nothing in the political history of any country so remarkable as the succession of the Highland chiefs and the long and uninterrupted sway they held over their followers. Somewhere about 1066, Malcolm Canmore removed his court from Iona to Dunfermline and introduced the Saxon language, and about 1270 Gaelic was entirely superseded in the lowlands. Latin was used in all publications, and there were not many who could read what few books there were. Gaelic was not printed till 1567, centuries after it had ceased to be the language of the court or of society. Then a book of John Knox's was issued in Gaelic, but it was 1767 before the New Testament appeared in the Celtic tongue. When it did, 10,000 copies were sold. There was, of course, a vast store of poetry and literature floating around in the minds of the people, passed down from generation to generation. But with the exception of two small collections, one by Reverend John Farquharson of Strathglass in 1571, and the other by Alexander MacDonald Ardnamurchan about 8 years later, it had all to wait until 1759, when James Macpherson, the collector of Ossianic poetry, compiled or wrote. Whether he compiled or wrote it is too delicate a matter to express a definite opinion about in this place, the classics of the Highlands. In spite of all these disadvantages, perhaps by reason of them, the Highlands remained the Highlands until the beginning of the present century. The many years of tribal warfare, and of warfare with other peoples, did not destroy the individuality of the race. It was the slow civilizing process of later ages that made the Highlands less a distinct nation than a province of the big British Empire. Of the circumstances in the midst of which the pipes and pipe music first got hold on the affections of the Highland people, we know but little. There were harpers before there were pipers, and probably bards before there were harpers, but these did not record contemporary history or the traditions of their age with any degree of fullness or accuracy, if indeed they can be said to have recorded anything at all, who only told the next generation what they had heard from the previous. Writing in 1603, a traveller says of the Highlanders, "They delight much in music, but chiefly in harps and clair-shoes of their own fashion. The strings of the clair-shoes are made of brass wire, and the strings of the harps of sinews, which strings they strike either with their nails growing long, or else with an instrument appointed for that use. They take great pleasure to deck their harps and clair-shoes with silver and precious stones. The poor ones who cannot attain hereunto deck them with crystal. They sing verses prettily compound, containing, for the most part, praises of valiant men. There is not almost any other argument whereof their rhymes entreat. They speak the ancient French language, altered a little." As to the country itself, it was a mysterious unknown land to all but the native. Ancient historians puzzled over its mystery, but could not fathom it. So they wrote under the shadow of the mysterious. Procopius, a Greek writer who flourished about AD 530 and wrote of the Roman Empire, speaking about the Highlands, says, "In the west, beyond the wall, Antoninus's wall, the air is infectious and mortal. The ground is covered with serpents, and this dreary solitude is the region of departed spirits, who are translated from the opposite shores in substantial boats and by living rowers. Some families of fishermen are excused from tribute in consideration of the mysterious office which is performed by these Karens of the ocean. Each in his turn is summoned at the hour of midnight to hear the voices and even the names of the ghosts. He is sensible of their weight, and feels impelled by an unknown but irresistible power." Now, we know how it was that the Romans could not conquer the Highlands. But we also know that the Highlanders were not, when the Romans came, the ignorant barbarians they are represented to have been. For Caesar ascertained from them that the coastline of Britain was 2,000 miles in length, an estimate not so very wide of the mark. We are told by one 14th-century historian that, "In Scotland ye shall find no man lightly of honour or gentleness. They be like wild and savage people." And by another that, "As to their faith and promise, they hold it with great constancy." Statements which are not at all contradictory. The once prevalent idea that a Highland chief was an ignorant and unprincipled tyrant who rewarded the abject submission of his followers with relentless cruelty and oppression was entirely erroneous. He might be naturally ferocious, or naturally weak, but in either case the tribal system curbed excess, for the chief men of the clan were his advisers, and without their approval he seldom decided on extreme measures. But though the sway of the chiefs was thus mild in practice, it was arbitrary, and they themselves were proud of their lot, their lands, and their dependence. It is related of the lairds of Barra, who belonged to one of the oldest and least mixed septs in the Highlands, that as soon as the family had dined, it was customary for a herald to sound a horn from the battlements on the castle tower, proclaiming aloud in Gaelic, "Hear, O ye people, and listen, O ye nations! The great MacNeil of Barra, having finished his meal, the princes of the earth may dine." The peasantry of the Highlands were always noted for their hospitality. "I have wandered," says Mr. J. F. Campbell of Islay, than whom none knew the Highlands better, "among the peasantry of many countries, and this trip through the Highlands has but confirmed my old impressions. The poorest Highlander is ever readiest to share the best he has with the stranger. A kind word is never thrown away, and whatever may be the faults of this people, I have never found a bore or a churl in a Highland bothy." Besides, the ancient Gaels were very fond of music, whether in a merry or a sad humour. "It was," says Bacon, "a sure sign of brewing mischief when a Caledonian warrior was heard to hum his surly song." They accompanied most of their labours with music, either vocal or that of the harp, and it was among these chiefs and these people that the national music of Scotland took its rise. It is a matter of regret that its wild strains are now more frequently heard amid Canadian woods and on Australian plains than in the land where it was cradled.